County District Attorney. The District Attorney's Office in Riverside County is the 4th largest in the state of California. We're a large District Attorney's Office. We're a large county. We have about 700 employees or so, 250 lawyers. What people may not know is we have a Bureau of Investigation, about 110 sworn peace officers that investigate crime. They do primarily follow up on our cases, getting cases ready to go into court for prosecution, but they also are involved in task forces. So we've got gang impact team, we've got the Riverside County Child Exploitation team. So we've got numerous task forces that these investigators are also involved in, and they're on the streets in collaboration with local agencies, the Sheriff's Department, and our federal partners in trying to take a collaborative approach to law enforcement. The other area that the public may be unaware of is we have about 100 employees that are victim advocates. So we've got the Division of Victim Services. What they do is they directly bring services to crime victims. So when someone's been injured, when someone's even had something stolen from them, they'll get a call from a victim advocate. And the role of the victim advocates are to, again, like I said, to provide direct aid. So they're going to help with things like getting restitution, working through the maze of the criminal justice system to make sure that the right paperwork is filed. For violence cases, restraining orders, no contact orders, things like that. So we have a whole, basically it's a social services bureau set up and specifically designed to help victims of crime. So having said all that, I've been the district attorney since January of 2015. I was elected for the first time in 2014. I'm in my 2nd term. Prior to that, just by way of a little bit of introduction, I've spent almost 25 years working in this office. This was my first job out of law school. I wanted to serve my community. I was born in Riverside County. I came back from my law studies and wanted to work in this office. It was almost 25 years ago. It's gone by in a blink. And I love this job. I love this county. However, much has changed in the time that I first came here as a new lawyer. And I want to explain that a little bit. So in California, we have essentially since about go back to the 1980s when we had much higher crime rates than we've had in recent years. And we started in California, we really started increasing the penalties for crime about 1980. What that led to was an increasing number of people going to prison in California. I started at law school in 1994, started as a prosecutor in 1997, and during that time, the criminal justice system in California was tough, and for people that committed crimes, gang crimes, gun crimes, hurt people, violence, there was a severe and stiff penalty. And so what happened is we the law enforcement and the criminal justice system, we sent a lot of people to prison back in the early 90s, all through the 90s. What happened during that time, beginning in 1980 and all through the 90s, so there's about a 2-decade time period, and I have a chart I can share with you, and you can share with your listeners. But as the population in our prisons went up, the crime rate went down at the same exact time. So what was happening over those 2 decades is that California prosecutors were effectively incarcerating the most violent, the most dangerous individuals in our society. It made society a lot safer, but it came with a cost, and that cost was many people in prison. The cost of imprisonment and the cost of running the prisons went through the roof, and at some point, something had to give. So about 10 years ago, roughly 10 years ago, California started to unwind some of these penalties, some of the culmination in 3 strikes, but some of the things that were sending people into our prisons for very long periods of time, California began to unwind those. The first major one, really big one that changed everything was called Realignment, and it came as AB 109. AB 109 changed imprisonment for a whole host of felonies from state prison to local imprisonment. So what that meant in practice was that people could be convicted of a felony And instead of going to state prison, they would do their time, so to speak, in the local jail. The problem with that was that different counties had different number of local jail beds, and so the actual effect really varied county by county. I'll tell you that in Riverside County, we got hit very hard by AB 109 because we had, for our population, we had a very low number of jail beds. So what that meant was that we could no longer punish some of the low-level felonies that were happening in Riverside County. Let me give you an example. In Riverside County, after realignment, let's take the crime of car theft. Before realignment, and it went into effect in 2012, our jail was filled to capacity, our local jail. And so there have been efforts to try to open a new jail and these things, and it's very expensive. And the county's in the process and they're working on that. But when AB 109 went into effect, our local jail was already full. So now this new law said that all of these people that were convicted of felonies would have to do their time in the local jail. What that meant was that when somebody went into our local jail, the sheriff had to kick somebody out to keep the numbers below capacity. So what that has meant for us in Riverside County is that we haven't been able really, since realignment went into effect, we haven't been able to really effectively punish certain kinds of crimes. For example, car theft. Let's take car theft. Car theft is a felony in California, but it's considered not a violent, not a serious felony. So it's considered a low-level felony. So if someone steals a car in Riverside County, they're arrested, they're caught, they're arrested. The district attorney charges them with car theft. Let's say they even have previous car thefts on their record. So we take them into court, we try them, they're convicted by a jury. Now a judge sentences them to, say, 3 years in prison. That's going to be the punishment for not only for the car theft, but the fact that you've got previous car thefts. Judge says, okay, we gotta punish you. We're going to try to put a stop to this. You go and do your prison time of 3 years. In Riverside County, what that really means is after about 10 days, they're going to be kicked out. And under the law AB 109, when someone goes into an institution and gets kicked out because that institution is overcrowded, the rest of their sentence is deemed completed. So think about that for a minute. You've got a judge who sentenced somebody to 2 or 3 years in prison. Because of this change in the law, they're going to do their prison time in a local jail. That local jail is already overcrowded. They're not doing any prison time. And there's nothing that, in other words, when they're kicked out, there's nothing else they have to do. And so the public and those in the public who steal cars, some people steal cars for a living, they know this. They know that there's very little penalty. And so what have we seen since that? We've seen a huge increase in the number of car thefts and vehicle break-ins. So my point to you all, and the citizens need to know this, is that when you have changes in the criminal law, there are very real downstream effects that happen and they affect people's lives. And I think the average citizen is out there saying, why in the world are there so many car thefts and car break-ins? And why are we seeing homelessness skyrocketing? And it's all because these changes by Sacramento and by the initiative process in California have had these terrible unintended consequences. I'm going to give you another example. So AB 109, as I said, went into effect in 2012. In 2014, the year I was elected, didn't take office until January of that next year. But in November, the voters passed Proposition 47. Now, Proposition 47 did a couple things. It said that all drug possession, simple drug possession, of all drugs was from here on out a misdemeanor, no longer a felony. It also said that all thefts of under $950 were a misdemeanor, and that no matter how many times someone was convicted of previous thefts, that the local DA could never charge him with a felony. So this Proposition 47 has had a huge impact on our quality of life, and let me explain. On the local level, most Riverside residents, even if our murder rate and our violent crime rate goes up, which it has, most people are not in danger of being murdered. Most people, when they're a victim of crime, thankfully, it's going to be on the lower end. Now, having said that, there are serious consequences to the quote-unquote low-end crimes. So prior to Proposition 47, someone who had a drug addict would find themselves eventually in court charged with potentially a felony, and they would be told, you're looking at maybe 3 years of prison time, and instead of prison time, we're going to give you a chance to go to a rehab program. It's a year-long. The prison time is hanging over your head. Now, that might seem harsh, but addicts are in the grip of a substance, and the substance has a hold of them, mind, body, and soul. And it's so hard for them to break it. And my heart goes out to addicts. And there's almost not a family around anymore that doesn't know someone, a friend, a loved one, a neighbor, who has suffered from addiction. And addiction problems in our society are rampant. And so when you've got people that are in the grip of addiction, they'll do anything to satisfy that addiction, including going into crime. And so what we've said to addicts now is there is no consequence for you deciding not to go into the drug rehabilitation programs, many of which that were administered through the courts and through the justice system. There's also no real consequence for you stealing to support your habit. So now what has happened is that many people who are living on the margins, that are drug addicts, they also suffer from mental health issues. And we are doing the best we can to try to help people who suffer from mental health issues to not send them into prison, to try to get them help. But I have to be honest with you, it is a struggle, because there are huge numbers of people that are just not going to get help on their own. And so they're out there on the streets. They're drug addicts. If you're using hard drugs for 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, eventually you get mental health issues, because these drugs are devastating to the brain and to the body. So you wonder what has caused this epidemic of homelessness. It's just this. It's Proposition 47, where we've essentially said to the public, there's no consequence for these lower level crimes. And they are lower level crimes. I don't think that prison is the best solution for drug addiction. Not at all. However, no solution is where we're at right now. There's no consequence. There's no plan. The voters passed Proposition 47, but we didn't pass a plan B. The state didn't come up with, an alternative for people who are living on the streets hopelessly addicted to drugs. And so when I hear people, say that Proposition 47 is somehow compassionate, I disagree. I think that it's cruel to drive by encampments of people their lives are a wreck, because we in the government and in society have essentially said, hey, good luck to you, you're on your own with your addiction. We're no longer going to do anything. We're no longer going to intervene to try to get you into some kind of drug rehabilitation program. So the public may not understand that these laws that are passed, and 47 was passed by initiative. Now, it was called the Safe Streets and Neighborhoods Act, so that's a whole nother discussion about how things get marketed. But there are real consequences to the laws that we pass and that we all have to live under. The last thing I want to say in this area is that there's a new threat in the area of illicit drugs, and it's one that this office and I'm taking very seriously. Drugs have always been a scourge for our society. They are, quite frankly, and I will go home sometimes and have a glass of wine with my wife. I mean, I enjoy that. But alcohol is also can and has been a scourge for our society in its long-term effects. But something's really changed in the last, I'd say, 5-10 years, and that is the introduction of a new substance called fentanyl. And I want the public to understand this, because it is devastating, and it's taking the drug trade into a whole new level of danger. And we as a society, I think, have not reckoned with that danger that it's coming to us. A wave is coming to us, and we're not really getting the word out. We're not really understanding what's coming. So let me just explain. Fentanyl is a synthetic opioid. Okay, so say like heroin that's derived from poppy is an opioid, and heroin, it can be found on the streets. It's obviously a very addictive drug, and people can overdose by taking too much heroin. Now, typically, prior to fentanyl, the way that drug overdoses typically worked was that somebody would take, say, heroin or other opioid hard drugs. They're seeking to get high. They become addicted, sometimes hopelessly addicted, and they have to take more and more of it to get the high. So eventually they reach a point where their body can't take it and they overdose. The production and the creation, the introduction of fentanyl as a synthetic opioid, you have to understand that fentanyl is not a naturally occurring substance. It's created in a lab, and a tiny amount of fentanyl is fatal to the human body. So let me just give you some numbers. 2 milligrams is a fatal dose for humans of fentanyl. It's a tiny, tiny little amount. It's a powder amount. There are 5,000 milligrams in a teaspoon. We are pulling kilos of fentanyl off the streets right now. So you can imagine how the substance is, it's pure poison, and it's finding its way into all kinds of drugs. Let me explain what the drug trafficking organizations are doing with fentanyl. Fentanyl is attractive to drug traffickers, cartels, because it's cheap. It's such a small amount. It's easy to transport, and you need just so little of it to get the desired effect. So what's happening now is that drug trafficking organizations have moved to using fentanyl in mass, and they're making pills on the street. These pills are sold over social media. Snapchat is a big place where some of these pills are being sold, but not only Snapchat. There's many other places on the internet where these illegal drugs are being sold. They're being marketed to people as pharmaceuticals. So what that means is you'll see an ad, a legal ad, for M30s or Percocet or Valium. Those are all names that we recognize as medicines, drugs that have been produced in laboratories approved by the FDA, and that doctors prescribe these drugs for different ailments, pain, and all kinds of things. And no, the overprescription of opioids is a whole other issue. Right now, I just want to focus on fentanyl. So what's happening, though, is these illegal pills are not being produced in a lab, not in an American lab, not even close to being approved by the FDA. They're being made in bathtubs and in abandoned homes and garages. And the drug trafficking organizations have purchased pill-making machines. And so they're mixing fentanyl with an inert substance. They're then mixing it by hand. They're then putting the powder into these pills that look just like the ones made from the regular pharmaceuticals. And then these pills are on the streets, and people at parties, in schools, at their workplace are being handed a pill, and they're saying, look, this is a Percocet. And they're mistakenly believing that because it's a pill and it looks like a pharmaceutical, that it is a pharmaceutical. But it isn't. Inside, it contains a fatal dose of fentanyl. And the number of people that are dying because of this poisoning is through the roof, up over 800% in Riverside County just in the last few years. So and all our neighboring counties are facing the same kind of surge in deaths due to this poisoning. In Riverside County, we're taking a hard line. What we're saying is, if you as a dealer sell fentanyl knowing the dangers and someone dies, we're going to prosecute you for murder. And we're going to seek to put you in a prison cell for the death that you caused. And so, again, that's the way that we have to push back on this. I know that I have plenty of critics that say, I'm not looking at this correctly, but I disagree. I think that we have to send the word to people that says, look, if you're doing this, doing something that you know is dangerous, it's just like driving under the influence. 50 years ago, we didn't recognize the danger of people driving under the influence. 50 years ago, the local police officer would just drive you home. Maybe 50, 60, 70 years ago. But now, if you get behind the wheel and you know that it's dangerous and you can kill someone, and you continue to get to drink and become under the influence and get behind the wheel, we will charge you with murder if someone dies. So this is the same thing. It's very analogous. And if you deal drugs knowing that you're dealing in fentanyl and you kill somebody, you're going to be liable for their death. So I could go on and on about this, but again, and we'll be happy to share with your viewers some of the statistics and things that help them understand the issues that we're facing. The last thing I'll say really overall is, yes, you need to pay attention closely to what's coming out of Sacramento. There's a bunch of new bills proposed. They're not laws yet, but there's new bills proposed that would take away sentencing enhancements. And a sentencing enhancement is simply something that the district attorney can charge someone for specific parts of a crime. Let me give you an example. Somebody can commit a robbery. Okay, a robbery is taking somebody's property by force or fear. So robbery includes a purse snatching. If a lady is walking down the street with a purse over her shoulder, an assailant comes up and pushes or punches that lady, steals the purse, that's a robbery. Okay? Now, robbery by using a gun is a more serious crime, obviously, because that same person committed a robbery by using a gun. So under California law, there's the prosecutor can charge what's called a gun allegation. What that does, it's not a separate crime, but it's an enhancement onto the crime of robbery, which means if you do these things, you're going to get more time in prison. There's also the enhancement of great bodily injury. So if somebody commits a robbery and actually harms somebody and physically assaults them and hurts them, and they cause what's known as great bodily injury, then they can get more time in prison. So essentially what enhancements and allegations are trying to do is they're trying to capture what really happened. In a sense, not all robberies are the same, right? And so there's new efforts by legislators in Sacramento to do away with enhancements, to do away with certain allegations, and it's very dangerous, because what we're going to end up doing is we're going to end up with a one-size-fits-all. All robberies are the same, and we're going to end up basically saying to the public, hey, if you commit a robbery with a gun, there's no extra penalty for that. So go ahead. It's essentially, unfortunately, and I don't mean to laugh because it's not funny at all. It's absurd, and it's absurd that we are even at this point in our society where we all should know that when you use a gun in a crime, there should be a very stiff penalty for that. And that's just one example of some of the dangerous ideas that are floating around Sacramento. We need to support law enforcement. This isn't a partisan issue. Let me tell you that this position is a nonpartisan position. I represent everybody in Riverside County. That's Republicans, Democrats, Independents. And let me tell you about the people of Riverside County. All parties, Democrats, Republicans, Independents, they all want safe streets. Believe me, I go out and talk to different groups. I talk to Democrat groups, I talk to Republican groups, I talk to non-affiliated groups. They all want the same thing. Sometimes there's different ideas about how to get there, but I assure you they all want the same thing. And so there's a disconnect between what the public wants and the laws that are being passed. And that's where the citizen comes in. You have to inform your lawmakers. Let them know that you know what's happening in Sacramento and what laws you want. If you want the law enforced and you want to make sure we have safe neighborhoods, you can walk down the street without fear of crime, then that's something you need to express and voice. We still have a republic and we still have self-government, and the public, the citizenry, has to express themselves and make sure they get the laws passed that they want passed. There's a third sort of leg of the stool in what's changed California criminal justice system in the last 10 years or so. The first was AB 109, which I mentioned. The second was Proposition 47, which I also mentioned. The third was Proposition 57, which passed by initiative. Proposition 57 was an initiative that made it so that people in prison could apply to get out early if they were engaging in rehabilitative efforts, taking classes, getting their GED, obviously avoiding any criminal behavior. Now, in concept, I support that. Those are good things to give people in prison an incentive to better themselves and to make sure that when they get out, they're not going to reoffend and recidivate. So the problem with Proposition 57, and it was the reason that I was very much opposed to 57, is that it supposedly was only going to apply to nonviolent offenses. So when the proponents of 57 unveiled it, they said, we're only talking about nonviolent offenses, and so don't worry, your rapists, murderers, people that are committing violent crimes, they're not going to be eligible to get out of prison early. Okay, so then we found out that the list that Proposition 57 considers nonviolent didn't make sense, and it's because it was using other and very confusing definitions that are found in the penal code. So, for example, under Proposition 57, somebody convicted who's sitting in prison for trafficking a child for purposes of sex would be eligible for early release under Proposition 57 because that crime in California is not considered violent. Felony domestic violence in California is not considered violent. Rape of an intoxicated person in California is not considered violent. Arson by assault by an explosive device in California is not considered violent. So again, on and on we could go. The list is long and devastating. The problem is that what people are seeing and what's happening in California is you have people in our prison system that are there for very serious, very violent offenses that now are able to get out early and have been getting out early. And again, you have to think about what message that sends and what do we say to the victims of those crimes? Because those are heinous crimes that I just mentioned, and people can and are eligible to get released early from prison if they commit those crimes. We haven't been able to fix this in California, and there's a huge loophole in Proposition 57. And so that sort of leads me into the next area that you asked about, and that is child exploitation and trafficking. It is a huge problem. I don't have the numbers off the top of my head because it varies, and the actual crime statistics that are compiled by the FBI are always a little bit behind, and so we do release those numbers, and we'll be happy to give you the latest that we have for sure. But what I can tell you is that child exploitation and trafficking is the fastest growing crime worldwide. It is organized crime and cartels and drug organizations. They're expanding into human trafficking. Human trafficking involves the sex trade. It also involves migrant workers. And that is another part of human trafficking that I think is often overlooked. It's a real problem, and in a sense it's a modern day slavery. But the trafficking problem, trafficking of human beings, is a growing problem. We are, like every other county in in California, we have task forces, we have law enforcement officers that are infiltrating these groups. The DA's office partners, for example, with the Sheriff's Department. The Riverside Sheriff's Department runs the Riverside County Anti-Human Trafficking Task Force. DA's office has investigators, an investigator on that task force, and so we work with them in investigating and getting to the bottom of these crimes that are really proliferating all over the county. We also have the Riverside County Child Exploitation Team. That's run out of the DA's office. The Bureau of Investigation runs that. Of course, it's a task force, so other agencies join that task force as well. But that task force is really focused on children. And what we've seen during the pandemic is an explosion of crimes against children, unfortunately. By some estimates, the numbers have doubled, at least doubled, in the number of, for example, child pornography, adults contacting children via the web, the internet, social media apps, seeking to have children send them lewd photos, meet with them, possibly exploit them sexually, potential kidnappings, you name it. It's horrific. And it's growing, and it's a problem that is, because of the internet, because of the freedoms and the anonymity that the internet provides and that social media provides, this crime has really, it's growing exponentially. That's the best way I can put it. This is what I would say to parents out there. We cannot do this alone. You have to know what your children are looking at on the internet. You have to know what who their friends are. You've got to pick up their phone and understand what they're doing on their phone. If you have a young child at home, or a grandchild, or a niece or nephew, imagine if let's say a 35, 40-year-old man came to your door, knocked on the door and said, "Excuse me, I'd like to go up to your child's room and spend some time alone with your child." Obviously, I'm being facetious, because no sane person would let that person come in and say, "Yeah, sure, go ahead, no problem. Let us know when you're finished." But that's essentially what we're doing by giving children unfettered access to social media. We're allowing the world to say, "We're going to spend some time with you alone." And those that prey upon children are very manipulative, and they groom children, and they get children to trust them over time. So it's very insidious, it's very evil, and I want parents to be aware of the threat that social media and the web pose. I'm not opposed to social media, I'm not opposed to technology, but there's a smart way to use it, and you have to make sure that you use common sense in protecting those, especially children, that are under your care. Okay, so the reason I believe that crimes against children has exploded during the pandemic is several things. One is that during the pandemic we had increased isolation, so people and children were kept away from extended family, so they didn't see grandparents, they didn't see aunts and uncles and nieces with the same regularity. And also the bigger one, I think, is they were kept out of school. So kids were doing school virtually, they're at home only with their parents, and so a lot of times, especially if their parent or a caretaker or step-parent is their abuser, then teachers are oftentimes the way that child victims, come to the attention of authorities. That maybe they talk to a trusted teacher. Maybe a teacher notices a change in behavior and says, "Hey, are you okay?" And now with children isolated in homes behind computer screens, we sort of lost that ability to find and protect them in a sense. So that's my best explanation for why it's gone up. And I'm sure that there are others, society-wide, and our culture is the internet's exploding, and more people are spending more and more time online.